Hey guys, Mr. Bowman here. Today's learning objective is in orange and we are learning to solve quadratic equations. So similar learning objective to the last video, except the difference being this time around they are not factorized. So to recap, to solve quadratics, we are looking to meet two criteria. Hopefully you can remember off by heart what they are. Forgive me as I'm spelling criteria wrong. But there we go, we've got two criteria. They must be factorized. And they must be equal to 0. So these are the criteria we're looking at. And the best way to probably understand what I'm looking at today is probably get into some questions. So let's say we've got x squared plus 5x plus 6. Let's say that's equal to 0. And what you can do is if you look at our learning objective, we can see it's a quadratic because we've got that x squared component. And we can see that it's not factorized. Hopefully you can make the connection between the learning objective and the type of question we're solving today. We then need to look at the criteria. So these two things must be present to solve a quadratic. So the first thing is, yes, it's equal to 0. So we can tick that one off. No, it is not factorized, which means we can't tick that off. We can't go ahead and solve that yet. So before we go ahead and do that, we need to factorize or put that left-hand side into double brackets. And here we're just playing that number game. What two numbers multiply to 6 but add to negative or add to positive 5? Hopefully you've got 2 and 3. So we're going to go x plus 2, x plus 3 equals 0. And all of a sudden we've got these two parts that we're looking at. So if either part is equal to 0, we're going to have a solution to our quadratic. We can then go ahead and solve both parts. So this here is a pretty easy solve. So our first answer of x is negative 2 and negative 3. We've got our second answer of x is equal to negative 3. So this process is fairly similar. So that's what we looked at in the last video. And all we've got is we've got the additional step of factorizing to be able to go ahead and solve our equation. So let's have a look at a bit of a meaner one. Let's introduce some negative sign. Let's say we've got x squared minus x minus 42. Let's say that there comes to 0. Similar idea. It is equal to 0, but it's not factorized. So we need to go ahead and factorize. So we need to think what numbers multiply to negative 42 and add to negative 1. I'm thinking it's going to be, what about negative 7 and positive 6? So we're then going to factorize for that. X minus 7, x plus 6 is equal to 0. We're then going to split into its two parts. So let's say x minus 7 is equal to 0. And our second part, x plus 6 is equal to 0. We can go ahead and solve each part. So we're going to go plus 7 and plus 7. So that means our first answer is positive 7 and minus 6 minus 6. And that means our second solution will be equal to negative 6. So far, pretty easy. A few of us might have realized, if you have a look here, we've got negative 7 becomes positive 6. Positive 6 becomes negative 7. So you could just do opposites with the number inside the bracket, but that won't work for equations where there's a coefficient or it's like 3x or 4x. It's not just x by itself. So let's have a look at a couple questions like that. So we'll change pen color because we know these ones are going to be a bit more challenging. So question number 3. Okay, so the equation I want us to have a look at this time around is, let's have a look. We've got 6x squared plus 13x minus 5. Let's say that there is equal to 0. So similar issue. It is equal to 0, which means we can think about solving, but that is not factorized. So we need to go ahead and factorize. And what makes this factorizing a lot more annoying is that 6 in front. So we can't just go what numbers multiply to this, add to this. We've just got to do a bit more. So hopefully you can recall these steps. So we got 6 times negative 5. That gets us to 30. So we're multiplying the first bit and the last bit together. We've now got to think what numbers multiply to that negative 30, but add to the positive 13, which we saw in the middle here. And if you go through all your factors, hopefully you've got what I've got. I'm thinking it's going to be 15 and negative 2 because they multiply. Whoops, that should be negative 30 up there. They multiply to negative 30 and they do add to positive 13. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish my working. So we've got x squared plus 15x minus 2x minus 5 equals 0. I'm then going to factorize the first bit. So they've got a 3x in common, 3x, and that's going to be 2x plus 5. And then I'm going to factorize the second bit. There's, apart from 1 or negative 1, there's no real factor here. And that there is going to be 2x plus 5. Just noting the last bit, negative 1 times positive 5 is negative 5. Hence why that's positive 5 in the brackets and not negative 5. But if you did write a negative 5, you would have noticed your bracket is different and hopefully something hit an alarm bell. That is equal to 0. Sorry about the funny small 0, which means it's going to be 2x plus 5. 3x minus 1 is equal to 0. So now that we've factorized, we've hit the second criteria, we can go ahead and solve. There's the first part and there's the second part, so we can split them up into the two equations. 2x plus 5 equals 0 and 3x minus 1 equals 0. We then go ahead, let's use our linear equation skills to solve these. 2x equals minus 5, and we've got divide by 2, divide by 2. X is equal to negative 5 over 2. Technically that's negative 2.5, but just want to note, please leave it as the fraction form. I find they're a bit more useful later on. We can solve the next one, plus 1 plus 1. 3x equals 1. Divide by 3, divide by 3. X is equal to 1 over 3. And hopefully you guys notice I did miss the 1 and the 2, but there's my first answer of x, there's my second answer of x. So hopefully you found this video useful. If need be, do have a look back at how to factorize quadratics, because that's going to be a really, really important skill. And ultimately, the reason why we spent so much time factorizing quadratics is because that is needed to help us solve quadratics. And ultimately, that's why we're doing maths, is we actually want to find out answers. So thanks so much for watching again, guys. Now let's get into heaps and heaps of practice.